It was nearly midnight in New Orleans, and the French Quarter had the tired, drunken look of a city that had been loved and betrayed in equal measure. The rain came down in sheets so thick the neon signs blurred into watercolor ghosts. Umbrellas bent and snapped like brittle shields. Streetcar bells rang in the distance, muffled by the wet night, and the smell of damp tobacco and sweet bayonets tangled with the metallic tang of recent blood. Isabella Morales moved through Royal Street like someone who had walked the same route her whole life and suddenly found the city alien. She had a shawl over her shoulders, though the humidity clung to it, and her heels splashed in puddles as she kept the pace that had always kept danger at bay. Quick, purposeful, eyes scanning. The bar had let her out early. A favor, they said. She told herself she was grateful for the small mercy and not for the way the bartender had watched her. As if cataloging where she might break, her apartment above a shuttered antique shop smelled of lemon oil and old paper. Lamps were the only lights. Electricity was a luxury she allowed herself only when the city felt safe enough to sleep. Tonight the lamps were off. She hadn't intended to be awake. She hadn't intended to be anything but invisible. Yet the rain had its own plans. A car idled at the curb below, engine whispering against the water-slick street. Isabella heard it before she saw it, the low rumble that speaks of engines built for discretion. She paused at the window, breath fogging the glass. A shadow moved in the halo of streetlight, broad shoulders under a soaked trench coat. And then he stepped out into the downpour as if the rain belonged to him. He looked like a cutout from every rumor she'd ever heard, about men who wore danger like a second skin. Tall, shoulders squared, coat dark as thunder. Water ran in rivulets from his hair, but his posture never faltered. When he raised his head, his face was clear even through the sheets of rain, handsome in the way old scars are handsome. Essential, unpretentious, having survived. She should have called the police. She should have gone back inside and locked the door and pretended she had not seen the man who had stepped into her life, without permission. Instead, she watched him stand on the sidewalk and look up at her window, as if he had been waiting for the light to catch her eye. A memory of a worn-out lullaby slipped through her. Ridiculous and tender. "Stay safe, Mia," her mother's voice. A small human prayer she had used to quiet herself during worse storms. Isabella let the curtain brush her fingers and, insane or brave, peeled the fabric apart. He smiled. A small tilt, not a promise. "Isabella," he said, voice low and familiar in a way that suggested names and debts and the weight of both. "You look cold." She should have been surprised he knew her name. She was. But what surprised her more was the way his name felt like a verdict when she heard it. Alejandro Cruz. The stories had a million faces. His was only one she'd seen in dark alleys and trembling witness lists. He was a name that made men step lighter. He was a man that made people measure words by the length of their breath. "Why are you here?" she asked, the words brittle. "You think I would wait for an invitation?" He stepped under her awning, water beating on the lapels of his coat like tiny threats. "New Orleans is loud, Isabella. I needed something quiet." The rain pounded around them. The city's noise compressed into a single, endless percussion. He smelled of rain and smoke and something metallic that made her chest ache with a strange, immediate recognition. He was the sort who had burned houses to ash for debts that were mostly soul. The type who gave someone life and wrote the cost across their days in red ink. "You should leave," she said. Because people like him had rules and she had learned them early. Don't stare. Don't ask questions. Don't become the plot of another person's war. He laughed once. The sound small against thunder. "You have a spine, Isabella. That's one thing I admire." There was no humor in it. There was calculation. And in that calculation, a cruelty, for the first time. She saw him not as a rumor, but as a man who could order the world to bend and was bored when it didn't. "That man," she said after a long pause. "The one who left that envelope on my stoop 2 nights ago, he said you wanted payment." She tried to keep the tremor from her voice. "He said you were owed something." Alejandro's face tightened. "He lied. Is that an explanation?" He stepped closer. The distance between them was small and disastrously intimate. She could see the flecks of soot on his eyelashes and the small nick on his knuckle where a bullet had kissed. Skin and decided to be merciless. "Payment is a word they like," he said softly. But there are other currencies. You saved my sister, she said, before she could stop herself. The memory of Aina bleeding on a restaurant floor, Aina's breath like a small life turned into smoke. Aina's laugh had been reckless, brilliant. Isabella had stood over her with sterile hands and useless prayers, counting minutes like one counts breaths. A rumor said Alejandro had been there that night. She tried to believe the rumor. She needed to. He looked away and the rain carved new lines into his cheek. I was there. She watched the muscles in his jaw move, the way someone might watch a wound heal with both revulsion and need. The space between them hummed with the unspoken. Why save her? She asked. Why not let the tide take her? Because I owed her one, he said. Not to her. To what she was. He paused. To you, his voice softened, as if the name on his lips was a confession he had rehearsed and failed. Isabella's breath hitched. She had no right to be moved, but she was. The rain blurred the street into a river of light and shadow, and he was the damnedest constellation she'd ever charted. You don't owe me anything. You're young to be so stubborn, he replied. It's a charming flaw. When he said the next thing, the rain seemed to hush the world out of respect. From now on, Alejandro said, the sentence simple as a command. You bleed only for me. The words landed like a knuckle against her sternum. Her reflex was to scoff, to tell him she was nobody's currency. But the truth sifted through the sarcasm. His voice held a promise and a threat braided, so tightly she couldn't separate them. You think you can own my blood? She asked, the laugh a thin thread. You think you can decide what I feel? He smiled, not cruel anymore, but honest in a way that made the edges of fear soften. I don't think, Isabella. I know. She wanted to step back, to put the balcony and 2 stories of brick between them. Instead, she left the curtain open and stepped outside so the rain could baptize whatever foolishness was blooming in her chest. For a dizzy moment she imagined the 2 of them in some other life, a life with different debts and quieter nights. It felt obscene and tender and therefore impossible. You saved my sister, she said again. And now you tell me I bleed only for you. That's not a promise I can accept. He reached up, touched the corner of her mouth with a thumb as if to erase the sarcasm. The touch was startlingly gentle. I'm not asking. What is it then? Alejandro's gaze bore into hers like a verdict. Protection, he said. Ownership is a petty word for what I mean. From now on, you belong to someone who will make sure anything that breaks you will break only in a way that scars for the rest of your life, not ends it. She flinched. The word belong felt like a trap dressed in velvet. She'd watched too many people trade freedom for safety. The ledger of her life already had too many unpaid entries. And in return? She asked, What do you want? Silence hung between them like a held breath. He looked down at his hands, then back up. Loyalty, he said. And the truth when I ask for it. She thought of testimony in a courtroom, of whispering names into microphones and watching men be led away in cuffs. She thought of the envelope, of the man who'd left it, of the tremor in her own hands the night she'd opened it. Lena, that's what Aina had called herself sometimes, had loved recklessly. And perhaps that was why she'd been standing on the edge of the world when someone shoved her. You're a cartel lord, Isabella said finally, each word a stone. You burn houses because you think fire makes things clean. He watched the rain on his sleeve, and for a breath she saw the place inside him that was raw and impossible to touch. Fire cleans what water hides, he replied. Sometimes people need to see the damage to remember to heal. Her fingers curled into the wet fabric of her shawl. She could leave. She could go downstairs, find a cab, a friend, any distance that kept her from this gravity. But the street outside was dark, and the rain had turned the world slippery. And something else held her. The need to know why a man who had built his life with violence would stand in the rain and offer her bones a home. Say, I don't trust you, she said. Her voice was softer. Say I want my life without you in it. He smiled, and in that small cut of mouth she read a lifetime of consequences. Then you'll be alive, he said. But you won't be safe. Choose which imprisonment you prefer. She thought of Aina's laugh, the way it had filled rooms and left echoes. She thought of her mother's warning. Asterisk, choose your cages carefully. Mia asterisk, she imagined Aina's hand in hers on nights when the world felt brave, not bone-deep terrified. Isabella's chest hurt with the weight of choice. "Give me one reason not to run right now," she said. He stepped even closer, rain plastering the hair at his temple. "Because no one can pull you from the water like I can," he said simply. "Because when the men who sent that envelope come back, they won't be satisfied with a body. They'll want your voice. I can make them stop wanting." She looked into his eyes, dark pools where storms sometimes took refuge. There was no charm there, no plea, only an absolute unflinching calculation. Protect and possess. Save and own. It should have repelled her. Instead, it set something inside her uneasy and alive. The rain began again. Harder, drumming on the awning like a frantic percussionist. Isabella felt the cold seep through her bones. She thought about running across a city of saints and sinners, the neon and the broken, and she imagined Alejandro waiting with a hand outstretched at every corner. She imagined him not as a jailer but as a bastion, and the image made her dizzy. With its simplicity, she was tired of being small in the ways that mattered. She was tired of watching the world chew appetite from the people she loved. Perhaps that was what made his offer dangerous. It didn't promise freedom, only a different kind of survival. "Okay," she whispered at last. The word a surrender and a rebellion. "Stay. Save me. Make the men who sent the envelope regret it." He nodded once as if she had answered a question about weather. "From now on," he repeated, softer. Now almost reverent, an oath stripped of theatrics. "You bleed only for me." When he turned to go, the rain swallowed his silhouette and the warm, wet air smelled for a moment of smoke and lemon oil and the possibility of something like mercy. Isabella closed the curtain and pressed her back to the glass until the city's lights blurred into a single luminous bruise. She did not know then whether the man outside her window would be her salvation or her sentence. She only knew that she had chosen a side. The rain kept falling, steady and true, and beneath its sound the city kept breathing, restless, dangerous, still astonishingly alive. The storm didn't stop for 3 days. It poured over New Orleans like a baptism and a curse, thunder shaking loose the bones of the city, lightning carving its name into the swollen sky. Streets flooded, balconies dripped endlessly, and the smell of the river bled into every block like something old and half-forgotten. Isabella Morales had stopped pretending she could sleep. The nights had blurred into one long fever dream, the echo of footsteps below her window, the low hum of an engine idling near the curb, and the certainty that he was never far. Alejandro Cruz. The man who stood in the rain and told her she bled only for him. He had vanished that night after she let him in, disappeared like a whisper swallowed by thunder. But he'd left proof of his promise, an envelope beneath her door the next morning, sealed with wax. Inside, a photograph of the man who'd killed her sister. And beneath it, one word written in a careful hand, "Mine." By the third night, Isabella couldn't stay still anymore. She needed answers. The bar on Decatur Street was half empty. Only the usual mix of locals, hustlers, and broken men looking for something to confess. The floor smelled of bourbon and regret. The ceiling fans spun lazily, pushing around the damp air. She sat in her usual corner, a glass of rye untouched in front of her. The neon light from the sign outside painted her skin in red and blue. When she heard the chair opposite her slide out, she didn't flinch. She already knew it was him. He looked the same, sharp suit, wet hair, eyes that carried the kind of stillness that came only after violence. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I could say the same," he replied. "I don't belong in your world, Alejandro." He leaned back, one hand resting on the table. "You're already in it. You stepped into the rain. That was the moment you chose." She swallowed. "I didn't choose you." He tilted his head. "Didn't you?" The bartender passed by, but Alejandro's look made him move on. It was the kind of gaze that rewrote a man's instincts. The kind that said, "Forget what you saw if you want to keep seeing." "Who was in the photo?" she asked, her voice low. "The man who ended your sister's life," he said. "Rafael Jimenez, one of my former men." "Former?" Alejandro's jaw tightened. "He went rogue. Thought power was earned by spilling blood that wasn't his to touch." "You mean Ana's?" He nodded once. "Then why not tell the police?" He smiled faintly, without humor. "The police don't take confessions from devils, Isabella. They only take their money." "And you?" she asked. "What do you take?" His eyes darkened. "Debt!" Her heart thudded. You think I owe you something because you saved Aina? I didn't save her. He leaned forward, voice low enough that only she could hear. I watched her die. I tried to stop it. I was too late. The words broke the air between them. The thunder outside punctuated his confession like a gavel. I don't want your guilt, she said. It's not guilt. Then what is it? Truth. He sat back, exhaling smoke from a cigarette she hadn't seen him light. You want revenge, don't you? She said nothing. He smiled, slow and deliberate. Good, because so do I. He drove her to the river after midnight. The storm had slowed to a drizzle, the city glistening under street lamps. The Mississippi churned, dark and restless, swollen from the rain. They stood near the edge, the skyline behind them a bruise of light. That's where I found her, Alejandro said quietly. Floating just past the bend, her hands were bound, but her face... He stopped. She looked like she was waiting to wake up. Isabella's throat burned. Why tell me this? Because you need to stop thinking she died for nothing. And you think revenge fixes that? He turned to her, the river wind tugging at his coat. Revenge doesn't fix. It rewrites. She looked up at him, at the rain sliding down his face, the glint of lightning catching the scar above his eyebrow. You're trying to make me one of you. His voice dropped to a whisper. No, I'm trying to make you survive me. The next day, the city woke in sunlight, the storm finally breaking. Isabella found herself in Alejandro's world before she even realized she'd crossed the line. A warehouse by the docks, the smell of salt and metal thick in the air. It wasn't the world she'd imagined. It wasn't gold chains and velvet suits. It was paper, ledgers, shipping manifests, photos pinned to corkboards. It was precision. A war fought not with rage but calculation. This is what power looks like, he said. Ugly, patient, necessary. She walked among the maps and files, fingers trailing over names she didn't want to read. You're showing me this why? Because you're part of it now. No, she said, turning sharply. You don't get to decide that. He took a step closer, his tone a mix of warning and plea. I'm trying to keep you alive. You keep saying that like it's supposed to make me grateful. He met her eyes, and for the first time she saw the exhaustion behind the steel, the faint tremor in his hand, the flicker of something like regret. You remind me of her, he said quietly. Your sister. The way she looked at me, like I was a man, not a weapon. That's why I failed her. Isabella's voice cracked. Then don't fail me the same way. He hesitated. I don't know how not to. Then learn, she said, stepping past him. Or I'll walk. He caught her wrist, the touch hot and firm. His voice was barely a whisper. You won't. She froze. Why not? Because you want what I want, he said. You want the man who hurt her to bleed. Her breath caught. And then what? He leaned in, his words a whisper against her ear. Then you'll understand why I stood in the rain for you. The electricity flickered overhead. The hum of the city outside sounded like distant thunder, and for a moment, just one, she believed him. That night, she dreamed of the river again. Of Aina's face, calm beneath the surface. And of Alejandro standing at the edge, the rain soaking him in penance. When she woke, her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from want. Because in saving her, he had already claimed her. And she hated that some part of her wanted to belong. New Orleans never really dries. Even when the rain stops, the city sweats, streets slick with humidity, walls slick with secrets. The quarter smelled of whiskey, cigarettes, and that faint sweetness that clings to decay. By the time the sun rose, Isabella Morales was already awake. She hadn't slept at all. The sound of the rain from the night before had turned into the hum of the city, a heartbeat she couldn't ignore. Across the room, Alejandro Cruz stood by the open window, shirt sleeves rolled up, his body cut in half by the morning light. A gun rested on the table beside his hand, next to a glass of bourbon he hadn't touched. He looked like a man preparing for a confession he didn't know how to make. You've been awake all night, Isabella said softly. He didn't turn around. I don't sleep much. She pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders, her voice still thick from silence. What are you waiting for? He turned then, and his eyes, that deep, relentless calm, met hers. A war one already started. What does that mean? He exhaled slowly, the morning light catching the faint scar along his jaw. It means the man who killed your sister isn't dead. Not yet. Isabella froze. I said he was mine. Her pulse thudded. You lied. Alejandro's gaze was steady. No, I promised. He walked toward her, slow, deliberate, the sound of his boots soft against the old wooden floor. Rafael Jimenez is still alive. I've been letting him breathe long enough to find out who paid him. Paid him? He nodded once. Men like him don't act alone. He didn't just take Ana because he could. He took her because someone bought her name. Who? He looked at her for a long time before answering. Someone in the bureau. The words hit her like a blow. The FBI. He nodded. They were using her, your sister, to get to me. When they realized she'd gone too deep, they had her silenced. Isabella's knees weakened. She sat down, gripping the edge of the table. That's not possible. Everything's possible when money talks, he said quietly. Especially in this city. She shook her head. Why would you tell me this? Because you deserve the truth, he said. And because when I go after him, I need you to understand the price. What price? The part of you that's still innocent. The day turned into a blur of motion and secrets. Alejandro made calls, sent men she never saw to places she'd never been. Isabella followed, unwilling to be left behind again. They moved through the city like ghosts, down streets that smelled of diesel and ghosts, through warehouses where the air tasted of salt and iron. In the back room of an old jazz bar on Basin Street, Alejandro met a man named Santos. Thin, nervous, eyes darting everywhere. You shouldn't have come here, Santos said. The feds are watching this place. Alejandro smiled faintly. Then let them watch. Santos's hands trembled as he handed over a folded envelope. I found what you asked for. But you didn't get it from me. Alejandro slid the envelope into his coat. You were never here. Santos hesitated, then looked at Isabella. You know what he's doing, right? You know what this means? She met his gaze without blinking. I do now. That night, back at the safe house above the river, Alejandro laid the papers out across the table. Inside the envelope, bank transfers, coded communications, surveillance photos. Every page was a piece of the truth. Every piece pointed to the same name. Agent Victor Halle. Who is he? She asked. Your sister's handler, Alejandro said. The one who swore to protect her. Isabella's breath hitched. He was the one who called me that night. Told me she'd been found. Alejandro's eyes didn't move from the photo. And he was the one who made sure she was. Her chest tightened. You're saying he sold her out? He nodded slowly. For a deal. For me. They wanted to cut off my supply routes. He gave them her. Isabella pressed a hand to her mouth, the sound that escaped her more breath than voice. She trusted him. We all trust the wrong people, he said quietly. She looked up at him then, fury cutting through the grief. And what are you going to do? He didn't answer right away. He poured 2 glasses of bourbon, handed one to her. I'm going to make sure he remembers what betrayal costs. Her hand shook as she took it. That's not justice. He met her gaze. Justice is a word for men who haven't lost everything. The storm returned that night. Thunder rolling over the river. Like footsteps from something ancient and unforgiving, Isabella couldn't sleep. She stood by the window, watching lightning flash across the water, reflecting off the slick roofs of the quarter. Behind her, Alejandro sat on the couch, shirt unbuttoned, a fresh scar along his ribs where someone else's bullet had once found him. You should rest, he said. So should you. I don't rest, he murmured. I just wait for the next storm. She turned. Does it ever stop? He shook his head. No. She crossed the room before she could think better of it. Then maybe it's time you let someone stand in it with you. He looked up, eyes sharp but tired. You don't belong in storms like mine. Maybe not, she whispered. But I'm already soaked. Something broke between them then. Not tenderness, but something rawer, truer. He rose, standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his skin. His voice was low, rough with restraint. You think you understand what this life takes? She nodded, though her breath was shaking. Try me. He studied her face like a man memorizing a sin. Then understand this, Isabella. Every person who has ever stood beside me has bled for it. And I won't let your blood be the next. Her reply came like a pulse. Maybe I want it to be. He reached up, fingers brushing the side of her face. The touch was electric, a warning and a promise. From now on, he whispered, his breath warm against her skin, you bleed only for me. And before she could decide whether that was love or damnation, his mouth was on hers, the taste of rain and bourbon, of ruin and belonging. When they broke apart, the storm outside had swallowed the city whole, and Isabella finally understood what the price was. It wasn't death. It was him. The storm broke at dawn. The streets of New Orleans steamed under the new sun, the air heavy with the scent of wet asphalt and magnolia. The quarter was quiet, too quiet, the kind of stillness that comes before something terrible decides to move again. Isabella Morales stood at the window of the riverfront apartment, watching the fog burn away. The night had been long, merciless. She hadn't slept. Alejandro's words still echoed in her bones. From now on, you bleed only for me. She touched her lips, remembering the taste of rain, bourbon, and the quiet violence of his kiss. It had been less a confession than a possession. And yet, for reasons she couldn't explain, she hadn't pulled away. Behind her, Alejandro Cruz moved through the room in silence, his shirt half-buttoned, his holster already strapped tight. Every gesture was ritual. Every motion preparation. He was leaving. Where? She asked, voice low. He didn't look up. You already know. To kill him. Alejandro nodded once. Victor Halle signed your sister's death warrant. He won't live to sign another. Isabella's fingers tightened around the edge of the windowsill. And after that? He paused, buttoning his cuff. After that, there's no after. That's not enough. For me it is. She turned, anger rising through the exhaustion. And what about me, Alejandro? You drag me into your war, make me part of this blood-stained gospel of yours, and now you expect me to watch you die for it. He met her gaze, calm, unwavering. I don't expect you to watch. I expect you to live. She shook her head. I can't go back. Not after everything I've seen. Then disappear. Disappear? She repeated, a bitter laugh slipping out. That's all. I've done my entire life. Hide, run, survive. You're the one who told me to stop bleeding for the wrong people. He took a step closer. And I meant it. Then don't make me start bleeding for you. The silence between them was sharper than any blade. By noon, the river was alive with noise again. Ferries cutting through brown water, engines rumbling. The world resuming its rhythm as if last night hadn't existed. Alejandro's men waited by the car downstairs. He stood by the door, coat in hand, rain still clinging to his hair. Isabella blocked the doorway. You'll die if you go alone. He smiled faintly. Maybe, but dying's never been what scared me. What does? His expression flickered. The smallest fracture. You. Her breath caught. He stepped close enough for her to feel the weight of his heartbeat against hers. You make me want a life that doesn't fit me anymore. Then take it, she whispered. I can't, because every time I do, it burns. Then let it burn. His eyes searched hers, the battle between desire and duty flickering like lightning behind them. You don't know what you're asking. I do. You're asking for a man who kills before he prays. I'm asking for a man who finally stops pretending that's all he is. For a second, he almost believed her. Then he leaned forward, kissed her once, slow, final. You deserve peace, he murmured. Not penance. And before she could stop him, he was gone. The hours stretched long and empty. She sat at the table, staring at the files spread out. Hale's photo, the bank transfers, the lists of names. Every line of it reeked of betrayal. By late afternoon, she couldn't take the silence anymore. She grabbed her coat, the pistol Alejandro had left her, and followed the trail he'd given up, pretending to hide. She found him at the Hotel Dubry, a decaying relic by the docks, its sign flickering in the haze. The elevator was dead, the air thick with mildew and fear. She climbed the stairs, each step echoing like a countdown. When she reached the 5th floor, she heard it, the muffled pop of a silencer. She ran. The door at the end of the hallway was cracked open. Inside, Halle lay slumped over a desk, blood soaking into the carpet. Alejandro stood beside him, gun still raised, his face blank. Not triumphant. Not remorseful, just finished. He turned when he heard her. "Don't," she said, voice shaking. "Tell me this wasn't the only way." He lowered the gun. "It's the only way I understand." She stepped closer, eyes wet. "You told me revenge rewrites things. So rewrite them. Start again." He shook his head. "The ink's too old, then let me write it for you." The corner of his mouth lifted, a sad, brief smile. "You really believe in redemption, don't you?" "I believe in choices." "And what choice do you think I have left?" "The one to live," she whispered. For the first time, she saw fear in him, not of death, but of what came after. "Lucia," he said softly, using the wrong name. The name of his sister. His hand trembled slightly. "I couldn't save her. You can still save yourself." Before he could answer, sirens wailed in the distance, the kind of sound that meant every secret had finally been spoken aloud. She grabbed his hand. "Come with me." He hesitated only a heartbeat before following. They ran through back corridors and down the fire escape, the world narrowing to breath and rain and heartbeat. Hale's men were already closing in at the alley's end. Headlights cut through the downpour, black SUVs, government plates. Alejandro stopped. "They're not here for you. They're here for me. Then we'll find another way." "There isn't one." He turned to her, soaked, bleeding, and still somehow impossibly calm. "You said you wanted to stop running. Now's your chance." She shook her head, tears mixing with the rain. "Not without you." He smiled, faint and aching. "You already have me. Don't do this." He brushed her cheek with his thumb, his voice breaking for the first time. "From now on, you don't bleed for anyone, not even me." And before she could stop him, he stepped into the street, hands raised. The agents shouted orders. Lights flashed. Then a single gunshot split the night. Isabella screamed his name. But the sound was lost in the storm. When it was over, the rain fell softer, like the sky itself had run out of fury. They took him away in an ambulance. Faceless under white sheets, his blood mixing with the puddles at her feet. Someone asked her if she knew him. She said no, because how do you explain to anyone what it means to belong to a man who teaches you how to live by dying for it? She stood there until the sirens disappeared, until the city forgot there had ever been a war in its streets. And then she walked away. The rain stopped the next morning. The streets of New Orleans shone like glass beneath the weak sunlight, puddles scattered with the ghosts of last night's sirens. The quarter exhaled in slow, heavy breaths, the way a body does when the fever finally breaks. For the first time in months, there were no footsteps behind Isabella Morales. No engines idling outside her door. No shadows waiting in the corners of her vision. Only silence. And the echo of his name. 3 weeks had passed since Alejandro Cruz fell in that alley. The papers called it a shootout between federal agents and a wanted trafficker. They didn't print his name. They didn't print hers. They never print love when it doesn't fit their idea of the story. But she had seen it. She had seen him step into the light and choose her life over his own. She had seen the last flash of his eyes before the bullet struck. Calm, certain, almost at peace. And she had understood, too late, that he hadn't died trying to end his war. He had died trying to save her from it. She left the city a week later. The rain had started again, soft this time, falling like forgiveness. The train took her north, through the slow fade of Louisiana into the quiet roads of Mississippi, through fields that smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. She got off in Memphis, rented a small apartment above a bookstore, and took a job shelving history she didn't believe in anymore. She told the landlord her name was Isabella Cruz. Every night, she opened the window just enough to hear the rain on the street below. It always found her. Some nights she dreamed of him, the way he stood in the rain, unmovable, eyes dark as river water. Other nights she dreamed of his hands, the way they trembled when he thought she wasn't looking. And sometimes she dreamed of the moment before everything burned, when his voice had been soft, almost human. From now on, you bleed only from me. In the dream, she never answered. But in the waking world she did. I still do. She whispered into the dark. One morning she found an envelope beneath her door. No name, no address. just wax sealed with a mark she'd never forget. The shape of a lion's head. Her fingers shook as she opened it. Inside was a single Polaroid, his hand resting against a window pane. A scar cutting across the knuckles. Rain streaked the glass behind it. And below, written in careful script, 3 words, "Still keeping watch." She sat down hard on the floor, the world narrowing to the weight of the paper between her fingers. He was alive. Somewhere, somehow he had survived the bullet, the blood, the fire, and he wanted her to know. That night, she didn't lock the window. The rain came soft and slow, the way it had that first night. She sat by the sill, listening, waiting. At midnight, she saw him, or maybe just the shape of him, across the street beneath the lamplight. A dark coat, a familiar stillness. He didn't move closer, didn't call out. He just stood there, letting the rain soak him. Her chest ached with something too big to name. For a moment, she wanted to run to him, to throw open the door, cross the street, forget every reason she'd built to stay safe. But she didn't, because she understood now. He wasn't standing there to claim her. He was standing there to make sure the ghost stayed away. To make sure she lived. She lifted her hand, rested against the glass. Across the street, he did the same. The distance between them felt infinite and holy, like penance. Like forgiveness. And then, as if on cue, he turned and walked into the rain, disappearing into the city that had made them both. Weeks became months. The nightmares faded into memories that no longer bled. Isabella learned to smile again. The kind of smile that comes from surviving something you shouldn't have. But sometimes, when the rain fell hard enough, she'd look out the window and whisper his name. Not like a wound. Like a prayer, because somewhere out there Alejandro Cruz was still keeping his promise. Still bleeding for her. Still standing in the rain. And that, she knew, was love. Not the kind that saves you, but the kind that refuses to let you die. The end.